there were babies, and there were orphan trains, and it's not like oh, this is a theory. It's like it was a real thing. It was a real thing, and there's very little logical explanation. First of all, like why were they shipping babies? You know what I'm saying? Why were they dispersing infants? and
Exactly.
and why were they putting them on display? Like those are two questions that that no one really has an answer to. Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Chicho, and today I'm excited to be joined by Jake Castrey. Let me tell
Hello.
you, let me tell you about Jake. He's also known as the Improbable Dreamer, aka the Doctor Generated. Most of you listening probably follow him on either Instagram or YouTube or TikTok. He's a remarkable content creator. I followed him for quite some time on several platforms, and he's amassed tens of millions of views across all his platforms, and likes and follows and all that happy jazz. And I've learned a lot watching his content, and I'm so fascinated by what he posts about and what he teaches about. So I was like, I've been trying to get him on for a while. We finally connected. Jake, thanks so much for beaming in, brother.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to finally be able to stop in.
Awesome, man. Do you hear that voice, everyone? You probably recognize that voice.
It's good
So,
to be on.
man,
Good to be on.
awesome to have you on, man. And I mean, you show up in a lot of your videos. So and sometimes you just do, you record over slides that you make. But it's always good for people who maybe only caught a few videos to put a face to that voice. So, and I was telling you, you've got a great voice particularly for the content you create, and your videos really complement your voice and your style of speaking. So it's awesome.
So basically, the World's Fairs are, in my opinion, like the introduction of the narrative of after the last reset. You have like a lot of firsts, like Chicago World's Fair, introduction of hot dogs, hamburgers, Aunt Jemima's, coffee or tea, like iced tea and stuff like that. It's like a lot of staples like peanut butter and stuff like that. They introduce a lot of these, staples that we still, consume daily, like Dr. Pepper and stuff like that. And at the same time, you have things like these baby incubators, which is where they're literally putting like babies by the hundreds in
Yeah.
these incubator chambers. The alleged story was a carnival barker turned philanthropist doctor came up with the idea for these incubators, and the hospitals wouldn't give him funding or the time of day. So apparently his solution was to make these big elaborate carnival exhibits with baby incubators now with live babies, and charge admission for these babies to be gawked at, and parents were just donating their babies by the hundreds and thousands. And that ties right in around the same time period of the orphan trains, the orphan asylums. It's all connected. There's also the time with these orphan asylums that the adult asylums were popping up all over the place. And I mean, you're looking at these asylums at the time period when America was especially relatively new. You were getting these asylums that looked like palaces or castles right out of European royalty. And they were being built in areas like Ohio, with the population under 1 million, built this big, giant, elaborate asylum in 1 year's time. Um, Again, you have these impossible build times with all of this, whether it's the World's Fairs or just, like the Empire State Building, also built in a year. They were apparently really getting things done without OSHA back then.
What the fuck? It's just so unbelievable. Like, so
No, yeah.
we got to stop. Like, so the but the roughly the decade with which these were introduced. Do you know, like, the exact year when they started popping up, or were they always a thing and they just, but we started to see memorabilia, real memorabilia that lasted from then, around what year?
Well, they went on like I'd say before the invention or the rediscovery of the camera. So you would have them in the mid 1800s is when I seen them start to really pop up. Like it's like 1860s somewhere around there. Of course, you wouldn't really get too much photos or pictures of them until the late 1800s,
Hmm.
and that's where you really start seeing these over the top exhibitions. Starting from like I would say really the big highlight point you could say is like Chicago World's Fair, which was like 1893, and they were just popping up every year since. And they kind of stopped right after, right before World War II. There was supposed to be a big one in Rome. They dug out and unburied Rome essentially because Rome was abandoned at that time.
Hmm.
Um, so they all got it mostly unburied for this World's Fair, and then it stopped because of World War II, obviously. But with that said, there's these in all of these World's Fairs, there's these zoo of people, which again ties right into this whole presentation of the old world,
Yeah.
presentation of the new narrative. Like these indigenous zoos of people by the thousands, people were packed in, and just like these baby incubators, they would just go and gawk at them. And it was quite a baffling display, like how any of that would be socially acceptable at any time period, and yet they were just doing it yearly like it was nothing.
And so for everyone watching on YouTube, you're gonna be looking at a lot of real pictures of this, and for everyone listening, um, if you want to see the evidence of everything we're talking about, you're gonna have to come over to the YouTube channel and check out the video. So, like, literally, there were babies, like, and there were orphan trains, and it's not like, oh, this is a theory. It's like, it was a real thing. It was a real thing, and there's very little logical explanation. First of all, like, why were they shipping babies? You know what I'm saying?
E-
Why were they dispersing infants? and
exactly.
and why were they putting them on display? Like, those are two questions that that no one really has an answer to. And we're going to return to the World Fair and the fact that somehow they were putting up these, huge structures, and you can see the scale of them. If you're watching, you'll be able to see. I think Jake's going to bust out his slideshow a little bit for us too. But you know, the theory, as I understand it, a lot of these, fairs, and in fact, a lot of these cities were run by a completely different energy system, an energy system that had to be, annihilated the same way all free energy systems have been annihilated over the last 100 years. The same reason why we've lost the last century, and we've, all been duped into thinking that we live in a free market with technology advancing, as fast as it can, when really true technology has been ruthlessly suppressed, and people have been killed who have come up with free energy devices, which would put the oligarch monopolies out of business. I mean, it would render their power over the people obsolete, and that's a problem. And government agrees. Obviously, they are cooperative and they're run by the same oligarchs. So,
Overnight.
so, and that's the theory, right, Jake? Like, virtually overnight, they were like, this all has to go. This all has to go. I mean, you're talking about the Rockefellers, the same families. You've heard the names, over and
Mhm.
over. Is that the gist of it, Jake?
Essentially, yeah. There's a few controlling elite families, whether it's the Rockefellers, Rothschilds,
Yeah.
the Morgans, um, and really they are the less than 1% that run it and rule it all, and they're the ones that withhold all this free energy. Um, they're withholding. all this technology, anything that's been brought out, there's been like cars that run completely on water. Um, those
Yeah.
people, of course, are quickly dealt with, either silenced in the
Or
worst
legally,
possible
yeah.
way, or they go away, get bought out. Money talks, and even people that have good intentions are oftentimes swayed by the almighty dollar in this
Mm.
matrix we live in. And that's exactly it. All of this architecture was, free energy designed and built, with cymatics.
Mm.
You look at like all these churches, all these cathedrals, and they all have these cymatic patterns, these cymatic energy designs.
Mm.
And they were all connected. These temples were healing with energy,
Mm.
with, cymatic energy. There's, like in the modern times, Dr. Rife invented a sound device that could cure most diseases and ailments by just basically blasting you with sound frequencies and vibrations.
That's right.
He was also the inventor of the modern microscope. He, of course, died mysteriously of a heart attack because
Mm.
there is no profit in a cured patient.
That's right. That's right. I have a friend who was suffering from Lyme disease, and I was like, "Dude, you just stop saying that you have Lyme disease, and go out and do what you need to do." And then he finally was in California, and he did like a week, like he was doing a bunch of stuff, but he knew he could get rid of it. He knew he wasn't. This was not going to be a long haul thing, and he finally met up with a guy who had a Rife machine, and like a week or so of that gone,
Mm-hmm.
good to go,
Yep.
good to go. Yeah.
So here's like an image of Coney Island right here. That was kind of one of those World's Fairs that actually stuck around. Um,
Yeah.
they've And of course Coney Island now, as you know, in New York, is nowhere near what it used to be. But I mean, just look at the grand illustrious lighting, and this is in the early 1900s.
Wow.
Moonlit towers. Just these towers that were powered by the moonlight themselves. Amazing technology that we have that is just lost to us today.
Mm. And it's amazing. I'm getting a cymatics tattoo on my, well, I have this geometry tattoo on them, and this side's going to be, this is a water crystal, but then this side's going to be all cymatics going down in my arm. And you know the inspiration for the tattoo was manyfold, but we were looking at this temple in India, which the stone was chain linked. Okay, a
Okay.
1,000 years ago, the stone was chain, like, and it's like, how did they do that? And there are these gorgeous cymatic designs, just like on the cathedrals you were just showing, and like, it's just it's becoming so clear to me how cymatics was so, like, absolutely necessary to whatever technology they were using. It had to have been had its roots in cymatics and sound, in that kind of power. It's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Same with these star forts here. I got one pulled up that's been a real interest of mine lately. Fort Jefferson, Dry Tortuga in Florida.
Hmm.
So the official narrative here, and kind of show you a little location. This is where the fort is, in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And it is the largest brick mason structure in America.
Hmm.
And the craziest part about this is it was never actually completed. They decided, officially in the narrative, to just build this fort in the middle of the Gulf for defense, though it really, I mean, you look at it strategically, like, what are they defending over here? Way
Yeah.
away from Florida. Anybody coming from the east, uninhibited. I mean, yeah, you got Cuba, but obviously you could just go right past that fort. But you have this big giant fort in the middle of the ocean. And they actually just came out with an article the other day that they found a whole city right next to it that's been underwater.
Hmm.
It's amazing what they just will brazenly brush off here. Just kind of half give you a story about it. And like this fort is really truly an impressive feat in itself. Here's some images of it. Again, all these bricks by the millions. Um, they just kept building and building until one day they just stopped. 30 years of work here, and it was never finished. They say because of the change in cannon technology. But and again, I think this is just another repurposed fort, these star forts. You look at some of these old pictures of them. I mean, right here, it's already in ruin.
Right. And
This is supposed to be relatively new construction at the time. This is in the 1800s. And again, back with my background in logistics, imagine all these bricks. They couldn't lime and make the bricks right there at the island.
No.
They'd have to ship them in.
Yeah.
And they just kept building and building this fort. And they apparently used like prison labor and stuff like that. But it never actually was built to completion. They just decided to stop one day because cannon technology changed. But I mean, you can see even here, like there's a whole nother covering of what was actually in the fort, like these archways, and they just bricked them up. And that's what they do with a lot of these old world buildings is they just kind of put a new facade over them, re-brick them up and move along, tell us that, oh, it was just a monument or a memorial or something like that, or some military fort that never saw any action. But these star forts are hidden all throughout America, Europe especially, even in star forts in Japan. And they all have more and more like just intricate cymatic patterns with them. And they're just, I mean, they were building stuff in this time period that just, it would be something if we could replicate it today or even anywhere close to it. But like all of these archways, these were all carved by hand. And they almost looked 3D printed.
Yeah.
I mean, just we don't put any level of detail or sophistication in any of these type of things.
No.
This was an archway, 1900 New York. They tore that down. All these old world structures, buildings, architecture, they destroyed. In most cases, literally replaced.
Why would they destroy that? I don't understand.
Was it practical, the upkeep, etc.? They never give us any good reasoning. Much like these whited out skies that you see here. This is constructions of some grounds of DC. As you can see, DC is quite an interesting story in itself.
Oh yeah.
This was supposedly the original capital before they redesigned it, but this looks like a completely different building here.
It does. It does.
See, I got like so many particular images. It's sometimes hard to pull out like a certain set. I try and organize them the best I can, but
yeah. No, it's and look, for people who are listening, like if you want to understand the depth, the literal depth of these kind of anomalies, then all you have to do is take a look at Graham Hancock's most recent series on Netflix, the one that has caused a big to-do in the archaeological community, and watch as he goes around the world and visits these sites, which we can see, and some of them were known, others are newer, only recently uncovered. But the thinking up until just recently was that they were between 5 and 7, 8,000 years old, and what Graham is forcing them to discover, and they're bringing in technology to scan what's underneath the fort, is that those sites, those their forts, their grounds, they're the very, very top of what seems to be one after another, just one thing that's built off
layers.
Yeah,
Layers.
Basically.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
just incredible.
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about here. So they got like those pyramids. I believe it was in Indonesia, that one episode of Graham Hancock. And they would literally have pyramids underneath pyramids underneath pyramids. And they're all like just layered thousands of years
Yeah.
apart from one another. And it exactly kind of ties into the whole reset theory. And mainstream science and archaeology does not want to, they'll grudgingly kind of acknowledge the great flood of Noah in a way, but
Mm.
um, they leave out all these other resets like this, Sodom and Gomorrah. Um, the more recent one, I'd say, the mud flood. But you can easily see when you start having the eye for these things. Um, Buildings like, in modern times, you go down any main street in any city and you're going to see buildings that have completely sunken floors
Yeah.
that used to be ground level. Um, and then you go even further back, temples and, grand coliseums that look like they've been outright melted or destroyed, deformed, bricks like literally just bulged out.
Yeah.
Um, so there's many different resets, and it seems like every couple hundred years.
Yeah.
Like in this instance, and this kind of ties, these images kind of tie into the orphan train and those baby incubators. They had such an abundance of kids back in the late 1800s. And this was again before any of the great wars or anything like that, where parents just seemed to disappear. And we would have these little kids in some of these, the most dangerous factories, textile
Mm.
workshops with very little adults around. And, they would just have instances where they would literally raffle children
It's
away,
crazy.
raffle orphans away. You would see them, just lined out like here, just paraded out for adults to come and kind of gawk at and pick their pick their choosing essentially. And you would think now, as they say, our population has exploded since then, that we would still have these asylums, we would still have these large swaths
Right.
of unaccompanied kids, but that's not the case. Um, we obviously have child labor laws where we don't send kids like this into factories and stuff like that. But prior to that, where's all the adults?
Right.
Where's all the adults that would just send these kids into these textile mills? You don't even see like adult supervisors in these
No.
pictures. They're just all children. And these are some of the most dangerous hostile factories. You would think
Yeah.
that these would at least be reserved for the adults, but not the case. And
So that's unbelievable. What's so Jake? The theory is that there was I hate the phrase "Great Reset." They've ruined it
kind of,
forever.
yeah.
But the theory was there was a tremendous reset, and so that what happened was a repopulating that went on in basically every nation, particularly I mean I don't know how it transcends to Europe, but I know that in America, and kind of the land masses that are all connected to the Americas, that there was the theory is that there was a great repopulating that went on, and the reason why they had these orphan um, trains and they had like literally like orphan chutes, like,
Yep.
and they look like little mini railways. I mean,
Pneumatic
it's
tunnels.
they were pneumatic tunnels, and like what were they building them for?
I still think they were in use. So the pneumatic tunnels, yeah, um, connected to all these big towers and these big orphans asylums. I still think they're in use by the elites today, but they're basically like, think of those chutes at the banks
Yeah,
where you put the money chute in, it shoots right up. They had those, but with carts, and apparently it was just a failed experiment, a small scale one. They tell us, but they were all over. They were in New York, they were in London, and these
yeah,
tunnels were just like anything else, abandoned and then recently rediscovered.
Hmm.
And again, yeah, it goes right with these children that you would show images
Yeah, and
of them just
what's scary is you see images of like them with the babies by the tunnels, like so they can make up shit and say, "Oh well, I don't know, we were creating a new Pony Express or like a new mail system, whatever the reason was." Like there are pictures of adults with infants by these tunnels, which is very suspicious,
very much so.
dangerous, and inexplicable, right? So there's that. The mud flood theory is, I mean, it's backed by hard evidence. You can see
You can
numerous
see the many, many,
structures.
many structures. Yeah, the
Yeah,
many
I saw.
different
See,
layers of structures.
I mean, so it's like the question is, how much is built over? How much has been systematically deleted from our history so that we don't know better, right?
It goes on and on. And there's layers. Like I've talked to people, in sanitation works in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and talking about their underground cities. And that's another crazy thing, especially in America, all these underground cities that they talk about, that they just, of course, discover them. And they come up with some silly backstory for them. And we're
Yeah,
supposed to just believe
where
it
they discover them
without question.
and make them off limits, like
Charge admission to them or make them off limits, exactly, for,
like they
our
did.
safety.
Yeah, for our safety, of course, like the
But yeah,
Grand
like
Canyon.
these sanitation workers in Chattanooga, they tell me just these stories that kind of just make my own skin kind of turn a little bit. Like they'll be in these tunnels that just have, intricate bricks, like just by the thousands, just going on and on. And then there's just drop offs where you can see the brick just go as far down as you can see, like it's just a black void.
Wow.
And there's just portions of the city held up by big giant tree trunks and like tree branches right underneath all these like bridge tunnels that just fall into the abyss. And you see that with like these sinkholes that just pop up, especially in China and stuff. I think, like all that sediment from the last mud flood kind of settles, and pockets of these underground cities and stuff are kind of re-emerging. And
Yeah.
we just come up with some silly narrative. Oh, it's an underground railroad or prohibition tunnels. Like you can go and search like YouTube. I have fun doing that, like looking for news reports, local news stories from like their versions of their underground cities there.
Yeah.
Um, they had this whole one in Florida. Of course, Florida doesn't really do basements or anything
No,
because,
they don't.
right? But they had these big giant tunnels in what was it, like Yegan, Florida, some small town there. And they just had these tunnels and had no idea what they were. You could see there were whole like layers of the old city. There was doorways, windows, etc. And they were just saying, "Oh yeah, they were like for the prohibition."
In
Like,
Florida?
yeah, exactly.
I'm pretty sure they were
Really,
doing
really
whatever the fuck
intricate
they wanted in
brickwork.
Florida.
Yeah,
you know.
but you'd see these same tunnels, these same underground brickworks in places like Atlanta, Sacramento, Seattle's got a really famous underground. Of
Denver
course,
does.
yep, Denver. Of course, the
They
story with
expanded it.
Seattle is that the city caught on fire and they just buried over the burnt first floor, just covered it
Um,
in mud and leveled it all out and raised the street level. But of course, when you look at these old undergrounds and you can actually take a tour in places like Seattle, it's not the case of a burnt down city buried over. There's like
right.
still street signages and like teller signs and stuff like that, just like right on the side of the road. And it's like we just uh, got covered over with mud and sediment from a flood.
Right. I started reading, you probably know this book, The One World Tartarian,
Yes, yes.
and it's just amazing to me how things tie together and tie back to Russia,
Hmm.
and how society diverged from that, and it's obviously what would be considered alternative history, but there are some things in it which are, which I already know are absolutely true and have been lied about. So it's always fascinating to me to read a book like this and put together pieces of the puzzle, with what I know and what I know they've been lying about. But it's a lot, it's a lot to try to um, unravel, and match with what you know. But you know, and I know this is a challenging question I'm going to ask you, but like, you know, if you could talk about it, if you could sum it up in a theory, people are like, well, I've heard about that. Like, what are the Tartarians? And obviously, Tartarus is Greek mythology. It means underworld. What have we been talking about, right? I mean,
Exactly.
it's not a coincidence,
Exactly.
but there's a lot to it, and it kind of, I think, begins in Russia. It obviously was a global, more of a global society then. But like, what happened basically, Jake? If you could, is there like a 5 to 10 minute way you could try and explain like what happened to Tartarus, to the great society that was Tartarus?
Yeah. So Tartaria was um, depicted on maps as far back as in the 1400s. I found them all the way up until the late 1800s. Now, officially, the mainstream narrative for Tartaria is that it's just a blanket term for parts unknown in the East from European cartographers. But I have many maps from all over the world, not just European cartographers, Russian cartographers, with Tartaria listed in Russian. Um, and it seemed like they were a far more advanced, connected, unified civilization that seemed to have traces all the way into America. And I believe that the land bridge from Russia to America was not too long ago. They, mainstream won't even admit to that, but if they did, they'd say it was thousands and thousands of years ago. I think it was much more recent. And it caused this, the empire to go essentially global. Um, that's why when you look at the American natives, a lot of them have close descendants and ties, if you read that Tartarian book, to the Mongols and the Mongolians.
Mm,
Um, they're close descendants of them, which would only make sense if they came over from that land bridge. So, this civilization, which many cultures, many people, even Marco Polo, discussed in great detail. And they seem to have technologies far beyond their time,
mm,
far beyond the mainstream's depiction of what they should have. And then I believe the reset, because I don't believe these mud flood resets or these resets are man made. I believe it's like anything else in this realm, it's a cycle.
mm,
I believe the reset hit affected Tartaria uh, conditionally hard, and the global elites of the old world then, the Europeans, etc., kind of came together after Tartaria was the weakest and essentially took them out the rest of the way.
mm.
Uh, with that, the technology was basically hoarded over, divided up, and what they could use for profit, what they could use to ensnare us and control us, they reverse engineered. And it's like a lot of the stuff that we use today, like the automobile and the gas powered
Mhm.
engines. Um, but the stuff that the free energy, the ether generating technologies, they all took that away because there's no profit in that.
Right.
And it would, of course, defunct the energy scheme that we have in modern time overnight.
Right.
If people realized, the extent of how much limitless electricity is in the air.
Yeah.
And I believe that's part of what all these, race to, cover up the Tartarian technology is it was all just one connected energy grid, essentially.
Right.
And, you see these antennas and stuff on these big gold copper dome towers, and then they just stick flags on them now and call them flagpoles.
Yeah.
But you can do a simple test of the ether yourself, take a drone, attach a copper wire on the end of it, and set it up in the air and put a voltmeter, a volt tester on the other end of that wire, you'll find the higher up you go, the more of a charge that line will come back with.
Hmm.
And we're discovering it. Another technology that was essentially lost was electroculture gardening, which is something anyone can do that's listening very simply. Just take a copper wire and some stick, wrap it around wrap the copper wire around the stick, and put it in your plants near your garden. What it does is it attracts the energy from the ether above, brings it in, and it electrifies, almost amplifies your soil better than any fertilizer, GMO or otherwise, can reproduce. And they were doing that with great success back in the 1800s.
Hmm.
And it was another thing that they just kind of
Oh,
cut
yeah.
out away from us, cut out of common knowledge, because again, now we got all these fertilizers and
Oh, yeah.
chemicals and stuff that they sell us. There's no profit if you
That's
find
right.
just how much, the
Listen, it's
natural
the
energy
it's the
advances.
same reason why you could take organite, coil, Tesla coil, and put it next to your plant, which is ailing, and watch as the plant becomes
Yep.
healthy again. It's the same technology, same reason. I have an arc crystal necklace
Hmm.
that Nassim, what's his last name? Um, my brain is fried. Which Nassim made. Now that thing is the crystals are positioned in a way that is generating energy, measurable energy, and it's
Yep.
not. How long will it do that? He has no idea. All he knows is that there's no way to stop it from doing that. I think you have to boil them to change the molecular structure enough to get it to stop doing that. But I mean, the stories that he has and what he's documented that these crystals do, it's no different. And this is what has been covered up, and this is what has been lost. And I talk about this last 100 years that we've been fighting over and killing each other over oil, the great debate over fossil fuels, nuclear power and energy. All we know how to do is smash, divide, and dig, and then fight over what comes out of it.
Exactly.
And that's not how it's always been. That is a recent creation. That is,
Shortly after Tartaria went off the map, that's
that's
when
right.
we started fighting over energy and oil fields and all that stuff. And
Yeah,
there's wars. There's great money in war,
war is
and
a racket. Yeah.
that's World War II was being funded by the same people. Both sides were
Mm-hmm.
being actively funded by the same elite bankers. And after World War II and Germany fell, then this whole globalist elite system we have now is in place, and basically it stifles innovation, creativity, any technology. It's all through the governments, and
Mm-hmm.
you come up with a great idea, a great invention. You see so many inventors, so many of them, and they just either disappear either by nefarious means or they
Or
lack
just
funding. They
yeah.
won't get the funding they need because everything is so controlled. Like, well, it's the shilling with global warming. You get all these government sponsored scientists that get bags of cash to
Yeah.
say, yeah, it's our fault and it's our Jeeps and SUVs that are
Bags
causing
of
this global
cash
warming. Yeah,
from the same companies that are creating the great garbage heap or whatever it's called in the Pacific.
yep,
The same companies which are putting plastic on everything.
everything.
Plastic is made by petroleum oil based products. They subsidize, even as they say, "Oh, we're going to switch to electric." That as long as everything is wrapped in plastic, it doesn't matter. They're not losing money. They're still making the money off the oil, and it's the plastics that are doing probably the most damage next to the pesticides and a few other things which human beings have decided are necessary to live.
Exactly,
Which is all insanity.
and it controls our pharmaceutical industry too. I
That's
mean,
right.
there'll be no cures. All the natural remedies, all the It's just labeled as New Age medicine or holistic medicine,
Pseudoscience. Yeah.
pseudoscience. Medicine and cures that were used for thousands of years. Once we discovered petroleum-based pharmaceuticals, addictive
Mm-hmm.
petroleum-based pharmaceuticals, all these cures that were used for thousands of years were just labeled as New Age and
Yeah.
fake medicine, basically. And
They were propagandized, and they
yep,
were smeared, by the Rockefellers, who are excellent at that. Even midwifery, even bringing our children into this world was slandered, and they called doulas witches, and they ridiculed people who didn't bring their kids to the mother to a hospital to bear children, and we turned being born into a business. There's a great documentary called The
oh yeah,
Business of Being Born. If you're ever going to have a child,
oh yeah.
watch this documentary. Save yourself. I mean, scars, heartache. Know what's going to happen when you are if you're thinking about or going to have a baby. Watch The Business of Being Born. Um, you won't regret it. It may make you uncomfortable, and it may just wake you up as to the kind of society we're living in.
And
Yeah.
it's not even just like the amount of money that from the birthing process itself, which is ridiculous. As a parent myself here, the amount of money that they got out of us, but even afterwards, like they were trying to upsell it. It's like, oh, your kid's head's slightly misshapen. So they tried to get us to go to this specialist in Chicago and spend, well, it wasn't our money because at the time we were having state assisted insurance. So it seemed
Hmm.
like that was a big game for them. They would send all these parents that, newborn kids with state assisted insurance to the specialist, and you get this big giant headpiece mounted onto your kid
Oh man.
because his head was slightly misshapen. I was like, no,
Yeah.
his head's fine.
Yeah.
It does not look misshapen at all.
Yeah. Take your
Like, no,
device.
like,
Yeah, I don't blame you.
and again, it's just all a game. People are getting paid money to shell out these
Yeah.
things, and it's been going on since the late 1800s, where they would go out and basically buy these medical schools. Um, Rockefellers and stuff. They would send out
Oh
these like
yeah.
little scouts to these medical colleges all across America and standardize them to their way of treatment. Um, by shelling out cash and
Yeah.
essentially being like, hey, here's millions of dollars, but we're going to control how your school's operated and ran and what you can teach.
We're gonna rewrite the textbooks exactly, and
And they did.
that's exactly what they did. And the Rothschilds are transatlantic. I mean, they're even in Russia. There's no place they have not planted roots in, and
Mm-mm. They're
I
everywhere.
mean,
They fund everyone.
they do, and they profit off everyone. There's no industry that they don't have their hands in. None. I mean, not
Exactly.
one. It's scary. So money is no longer their game. It just can't be, because if you have like $50 trillion in assets, what could you possibly? I mean, what are you going to do? Put a little more with the rest? What do you know what I'm saying? That's
Right.
everything is just a game. Everything is just how can we manipulate? What's our vision of this earth, since it's ours, and that's what they do.
That is
Um,
exactly it.
it's
We
sad
run it
that
to
they,
serve us or to serve them.
yeah,
And and it's all of our labor and all of our time and energy and our spiritual
hmm,
selves being sacrificed for their gain. It's all this architecture nowadays, like it's built to, basically restrict us and keep us put down uninspired. Architecture of the old world was built to uplift, built to inspire.
yeah, and you see this d, notice the uniformity, and the way things are built. I mean, there's no identity to it. There's no culture
Nope.
to it. There's no
All
gender. There's no
just ugly
anything else.
boxes.
And that is for a reason. That it's not modern. It's ugly. It's artless. There
Exactly.
there's nothing to it. And the sad thing is it's methodical. It's as methodical as our shoddy school systems in America,
Yep.
and how they continue every year to lower the bar so that our kids know less and less and less. True, absolutely authoritarian dictator tactics. I mean, you talk to, not that you can, but people who have survived the North Korean regime, they'll tell you there's no dictator in the dictionary. There's no word for dictator. Ignorance is taught, in those
Hmm.
countries, and that's what's becoming our country, unfortunately, because these powers have, they've taken over.
Honestly.
But yeah, so you guys got, this, it's all worth looking into. I always say, it's like to, all knowledge, particularly history, is worth learning, even if it's something that seems unbelievable, because how are we going to create a vision of the future, when we don't even know where we came from,
Exactly. It's what I always tell people. It's like, when they say, what's this? What's the point of it? What's the purpose? It's in the past. It doesn't matter. And I'm always reminded of the famous saying, to understand where we're going, we must first know where we've been. And they've worked so hard to disconnect us from our past, from our true past, from our true identity. And you can see that in reflections of our architecture, reflections of how we are in school. We don't, we're not inspired. We're not teaching the next generation of leaders, the next generation of free thinkers.
No.
We're teaching basically people to sit down, shut up, don't ask questions, read from the textbooks,
Mm-hmm.
memorize from the textbooks, and do some Scantron little test.
Mm-hmm.
That's our school system. Free thinkers are often squashed in school.
Yeah, no, and even schools that pretend, well, they masquerade under, we teach them to think. Now you teach them what to think. You don't teach them to think.
Yeah,
You teach them what to think about certain things.
how to think properly.
Yeah, and that's a problem,
Really is.
because all of history is simply his story. I mean,
It's
there's
nothing
no.
more than a set of lies they agreed upon,
That's
and we
right.
weren't there to make any decision about it.
And it's amazing, what you can instill in a person from a young age, and have. I mean, that's how we're designed. I mean, the computer is based on the human brain, the human
Hmm.
capacity to think and store information. A computer is programmed. We made the most advances in algorithms and AI, even as we continue on with AI, because they figured out how to imitate the neurological activity of the brain. That's
Yep.
all the breakthroughs came when they figured that out. They had to get the computer to try to imitate the brain, and it's not an easy feat. But
No,
it
we still haven't mastered it.
yeah, and it teaches us about ourselves too, and how programmable we are to believe certain things. I
Indeed.
mean, all you gotta do is talk to a Scientologist if you don't
Yeah.
understand that. You know,
Right.
um, amazing. Another guy who hung out with the elites and figured out a way to create his own religion, Scientology.
Well, I mean, who was the dude's best friend was the dude that
Crowley.
created NASA, and they both had their little goal of let's see who can create the best religion. It
Hmm.
seems like the dude that created NASA won because it's the only federal government organization we can't criticize. Like,
NASA.
yep, like left or right, it doesn't matter. Like that's the one side of the aisle that all sides will come if you criticize their beloved NASA.
That's crazy to me.
And I mean, it was, oh, you don't
Be-
believe we went to the moon? No.
yeah, because
Like, have you
but
seen the footage?
I mean,
You just
it's
don't understand camera technology. Okay, well, make me understand it,
yeah.
please.
Help me understand it. I don't. It's funny because NASA is such a joke. They're such a front. You know what I mean? Like, and they've always been such a front that I don't get in trouble for criticizing them, because I just assume that everybody knows that they're full of shit.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't say anything, but so I don't really know about the censorship. But I know their marketing campaign picked up about 5 years ago, because everyone started wearing NASA shirts, and I was like, God, this is what we've been reduced to. We're selling T-shirts and hats now.
Oh,
Um,
yes. That
it's just a
taxpayer
part of
expense.
the whole it. lying front. The CIA, the FBI, NASA, all these organizations popped up right around the same time, and they were created by the same people. This is what people think, like, oh, the FBI have created. So maybe if you join the FBI, you've joined it for the right reasons. And I would hazard a guess that probably 90% of the FBI are guys who got into it to stop criminals, to
Hmm.
stop people who are hurting people. And I'm sure kids who grow up and want to become astronauts get into NASA for the same thing. They want to be, they want to go and be in space. But the problem is, though, when they get in, they all probably learn the same thing, that at the highest levels, there's not much they're going to be able to do to change the lies, that have
Yep.
been perpetrated on the American people in the world. And that's the
Agreed.
sad thing. But you can trace the roots of all of these organizations, including the FBI, the CIA, to the same people, the same oligarch,
Yep.
fascist ruling elite, who wanted an organized way that is detached from them to go out and, literally execute their will and enforce their will on people. What better way to do that than have a criminal fighting organization that happens to work hand in hand with the mafia?
Right.
You
No, it's just
know,
funny that, we fought fascism in World War II, and then all these, mortal enemies and evil people became all of our top government officials with
mm,
paperclip.
Operation Paperclip. I just watched a
Yep.
special on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like, oh, these are the enemies, but now we're going to have them run all of our government facilities and
and meanwhile,
organizations.
those like bold-faced lies to the American people, one after the next, all the way up until Carter, when Carter was still saying, "Well, if we're going to find out if there are Nazis working among us," be like, dude, you know what I mean? Damn, you worked in the CIA. You know damn well there's Nazis working for us. They've been
Hmm.
working for us since the war ended, and we smuggled them into the country. And
Right.
the ones that we couldn't smuggle in because their faces were on every newspaper for the millions of people they killed, you brought them to some place where you could use them and utilize them anyway.
Hitler
You
in
know
Argentina.
exactly. Brazil, Argentina. You know, it's atrocious. The question is what it's like what happened, because it seemed like a good idea. America was all at once built on these ideals and this dream, right? And they knew that in order to separate themselves from the queen, at least at first, they had to create a country with these ideals. But even before the ink was dry, already these ideals were in jeopardy because the crown came a knocking, and the crown owns just about everything.
And we're still a corporation under the crown.
That's right. That's right.
Hi, buddy. Okay.
I'm going to let you give him his bandwidth in a minute. Let's go far out before I let you go.
Yeah.
So tell me, my friend, do you like, what is the craziest, most supernatural experience that you've ever had? And if you've never had one, don't worry about it. We can find another way to go about it.
Supernatural experience, like kind of my own personal paranormal experience.
Sure, sure. I mean, it could be that. It could be, it could be anything. It could be experience with a ghost or UFO or whatever it was.
Orbs are my biggest
Orbs.
fascination. My own personal experience with them, especially the last couple of years, my witnessing of them are quite exponentially high, and I almost feel like it's a. I've heard other people talk about this, like a kind of psychic communication between them. Like, yeah, I know when I'm going to see them,
Hmm.
and I know where they're going to be, type thing. But
Wow.
yeah, and I've had my family over, and all of them experiencing these two. They're amazing. They look almost like they're satellites or whatever you want to see,
Hmm.
just little balls in the sky. But then they'll stop, they'll start flashing, they'll start
Start playing. Yeah.
strobing and orbing. And somebody told me once to get a laser pointer, and that's when the fun really began.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
you
man.
hit them with laser pointers, they'll communicate with you,
Oh, totally, dude.
and
Totally.
it's wild. But that's something that I seen. It used to be like you would see one every couple of days or so, but now, depending on the sky, you could see like dozens in a
Yeah,
single evening,
that's
and
amazing.
they're out there, and They're quite amazing. I don't know what they are, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. I don't think they're little green men, and I don't think they're satellites.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think they're little green men, although they could be little people of sort who are not
Yeah.
who are not physical, but who
Hmm.
are certainly, I believe they're sentient. I believe they're, they're conscious, and that, the fact that your intuition tells you where they're going to be. And, and I have some experience, and I've seen orbs, and, and I've seen, what would classically be called, a UFO or UAP. The reason why they changed them to UAP was because they were a phenomenon. They were more of a phenomenon than, like, let's say that not everyone is looking at a ship. And, there's, I mean, so I've been out, and you can certainly communicate in that way, and you can actually kind of consciously um, tune in to and kind of connect with them,
Agreed. Yeah.
and like sometimes you're connecting with them, and it looks like they're going, and you're like, no, wait, don't go, and then all of a sudden they'll
Yep.
turn around,
Yeah. Then they'll
which
flash you again. Yep.
is,
Yep.
it's just, you just know it's not a coincidence. It literally happens at the speed of thought.
Hmm.
And I believe in UFOs, and I believe that they're sentient, and I certainly don't believe that they're, we were in any danger from them, that a lot of people are like,
Yeah. I don't feel danger when I see them. It's just like a weird sense of being watched almost.
yeah, yeah, that's cool though, man. That's cool. I think that they're, you've got friends in high places,
Yeah. It's
you know.
definitely, definitely.
It's comforting. But man, this has been awesome, dude. I'm a big
Yeah.
tell everyone the name of your channel. I mean, I think a lot of people follow you who follow me, but tell
Yeah.
everyone where to
So
find you.
my Telegram or my TikTok page is the Doctor Regenerated. Instagram, you'll find me as the Improbable Dreamer. That's kind of my main brand name. You'll find a lot of my channels, like if you search YouTube, Facebook, Telegram, the Improbable Dreamer. You just click on my link tree in my bio too and find all my other pages. But a lot of short-term videos. I try and post a couple every day almost, and long style format videos, 20, 30 minute sit down videos on YouTube here about once a week.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So, Jake, I'm gonna have my editor reach out to you,
Okay.
so we'll get some, like, because probably I've never used the screen sharing feature on this software.
Okay.
But we'll probably just reach out and get some of the slides to show
Yeah.
everyone what we're
Yeah, I
talking
got
about.
tons of images, whatever you'd
Okay,
like to
cool.
see. Just let me know what I can kind of
Awesome, bro.
get them branched out together and put them in folders for you. I should have sat down and kind of went through some of my images and
Yeah, don't
separated them
worry.
a little bit out here and got some particulars. But maybe next time if we do it again, I'll have
Yeah,
more files set and ready to go.
yeah, no worries, man. We can, we'll figure out what kind of order to put them in, and I love introducing some of this to my listeners who maybe haven't heard about some of these anomalies, and it's been a pleasure, man. I'm glad we found time to do
Absolutely.
it. We'll do it
Yeah.
again, brother, and I'm sure I'll see you online.
Sounds good, sir. Thank you
All
again.
right,
Have a
Jake.
great rest of your day.
You too, Jake. Thanks, man.
Yep. Bye bye.
Bye.